But Raul Rosas Jr. became the youngest UFC fighter in history at 17 years and 6 months
It's
old.
nuts.
Came through the Contender Series. Did you manage to see the fight?
I saw the highlights. I didn't watch the whole fight. It looked pretty scrappy, to be fair. Like, give me a rundown of the fight.
So, my first introduction was, it was actually quite funny, because when he first got announced to go on to Dana White's Contender Series, I thought, this boy looks really familiar. I have watched him and his brother in grappling tournaments on UFC Fight Pass.
No, nice.
And I was convinced that I messaged him, and I was sure that I did. So I went on to my DMs with him, and he had 1,400 followers, I think, and I DM'd him, like, just kind of thing, like, just watching you, blah, 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 like, great performance. Like, he was
Nice.
slick, like, seriously slick, and really fun to watch. They weren't speaking about MMA on the broadcast or thing, or any sort of transition into that, so I didn't even think of this. But when I saw it happen, obviously I knew he came in as a specialist grappler, so I was really interested to see where his striking was at. Obviously, obviously, it's still very, very green on the striking.
Yeah.
And still very green in the striking defense, especially. The matchup that he had with the fella was probably an oversized flyweight, to be perfectly honest. He was quite small, and I think someone on the commentary mentioned the same. But he was also a grappler. He was also a highly credentialed, obviously not as good, but he was a highly credentialed grappler. So I think the matchup was more favourable, probably, maybe, just because it was always going to go into a grappling realm, if that makes sense, I think. And he just has literally an advantage over so many people. But to give you a breakdown of how the fight went, it was just a case of he was just one step ahead in every sequence.
Yeah.
You know, when you watch high-level grappling, and the better guy usually just beats the position, right? So he just beats every position.
Yeah.
He had a lot of slick attempts. He had a lot of just simple things that he done very well, just like passing the guard. Just incredible ability to get into side control so effectively. He nearly got a Pulev stretch, which was pretty impressive. A couple of just, I don't want to say rookie errors, that's not the right word, but a couple of mistakes which you would sort of imagine. I think he thought the fight was going to be a little bit easier than it was. But ultimately, he came in, he was bouncing off the cage walls, which I thought, fuck me, he was jumping and actually bouncing off the walls when he came in. And I thought, even that is impressive, because you could get your toe caught, fall flat on your face, and embarrass yourself in front of national television. So, but yeah, so a bit back and forth. That was a little bit of breakdown of what you've seen of him, the fight, and of what you've seen in the media, and just as a 17-year-old coming into the company. What do you see with him? Where can you see this? Not called an experiment.
It's
but
tough,
where do you
right?
see him going?
Yeah, it's tough because once you get into the UFC, don't get me wrong, you can get good matchups, but you're not getting any walkovers by any stretch. So your whole learning and kind of not perfecting your craft, but all that experience is in the UFC, you know. So if you fuck up, you kind of got only so many lives that you can go to. Do you know his record off the top of your head?
I think that takes him on to 6-0 professional fights.
Okay. And he fights at Bantam.
Fights at 135.
Yeah, it's tough, you know. Like you're not getting any easy nights out in the UFC at bantamweight. So I like it. I'm into it. It's interesting to see where it goes. 17 is so young to be in the UFC. Like, if I think of what I was doing at 17, and fighting in the UFC, it's actually nuts. But fair play, you know. He's obviously got the skills. It's just a case of him maturing in the UFC, and if he can do that.
It's a super tough thing to do, what you just touched on there as well, maturing in the UFC. You hear so many people talk about sometimes being outside of the organisation and the growth that they need, and even just, as you'll know, even just maturing from the ages of 17 to, say, early 20s, 22. not even in a sporting terms, just as a person, there's so much that happens, life experiences and just immaturity that you're growing through.
Sure.
To have all this attention, which the thing is with Raul Rosas Jr. now is every single fight is going to be the same thing. The 17-year-old, the youngest fighter ever, wanting to be the youngest champion ever, because he's obviously come out and openly said that. So you just build up this mountain pressure, and then you add on to that having to actually fight in the toughest organisation, in the toughest division. It's just incredibly hard. And he's come out off the bat and already said, if I could fight a top 5 contender in my debut, I would. Now, a top 5 contender in the bantamweight division is Chito Vera, Peter Yan, Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen. So I am not so sure about that yet. And I think he'll learn to sort of slow his roll. But if you think back to what John Jones done at a young age, you realise how crazy this is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think some of them, like, you need to have that level of confidence almost if like, you know, you're going to be one of the greats. But like, there's a fine line between confidence and almost delusion. And it's not to say that he is deluded, but it's like you are not ready yet for those guys. Not to say you can't beat them one day, but you look at the top 5 guys. There's not anyone there that you're just going to take down and keep there. You know. And look through the list, you've got the Dillashaw, Sandhagens, Yan, O'Malley, Sterling. It's killers.
The thing as well is, you'll hear the word, and we speak about it often so much, about experience. What does that actually mean? Well, when you have a look at someone who's 17, or not even 17, just 6-0 as a professional, really, which is quite a lot of fights for a 17-year-old, and the fact that he managed to get that many sanctioned is actually quite impressive. But he's coming into it with a specialist skill set in terms of grappling. You have a look at the top of that division, right? Aljamain Sterling, TJ Dillashaw, like everyone that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They have all of those things. They have your specialities, but then they also have what's called MMA, which is putting striking and wrestling and grappling and submission, defense, offense, cage work.
World class.
That's another thing. He's been grappling his whole life in terms of a jiu-jitsu setting, but these people have been competing in a cage their whole life, which is actually a really different dynamic, because there's so many different things that happen when you have a cage to defend and actually attack as well. So there's so many pictures that he hasn't seen yet, which these guys at the top of the tree have had experience in and have had to ride out. But like you said, you have to have this delusion, you have to have this confidence to go in and truly believe that you're going to go in and take over. So I am excited, but 135 pounds is the worst division to be a 17-year-old in and taking over, quite honestly.
Yeah.